Welcome into the Redbird Reboot podcast, where we talk all about the Arizona Cardinals. We study some film. We cover everything possibly related to your favorite NFL football team. This is one of our, I would say at least, I think we're getting closer to show 40, Marcos. This is one of our shows, at least, that I always look forward to every year, covering the Senior Bowl, also covering the Super Bowl. It's been a very rainy sort of week for those who are out here in the valley. The Super Bowl, fortunately, isn't here in Phoenix. It's going to be played in Las Vegas this year. Marcos, how are you feeling heading into the biggest football game of the season?
Well, I'm feeling excited and not really because of the fact that we've seen these two teams already face off before. So it's like they're right back to the Super Bowl. Got to decide which one do you got to go for. Do you go for the 49ers, which I would guess a lot of people would say no, or do you go for the Chiefs who have won it before and have gone to the Super Bowl in the last 4 years? So it's just kind of like a situation where you either go for the franchise that's already won Super Bowls and been to the Super Bowl, or you just go for the other one. And if you're going to go for the other one, you're going to go for the reason of like, hey, the quarterback's actually from here and is born and raised here, and there's a local amount. It's a local love here for Brock Purdy. So, I mean, that's how I feel about it. Not that much excited. I'm excited for the players to go play in Las Vegas. That's going to be the first time they hoist the Super Bowl. So we'll see how it plays out.
Absolutely. So, before we get to talking about the Super Bowl, let's see if we can at least talk a little bit about just from what we're seeing with this week and with the Arizona Cardinals. One of the spots, Marcos, that we wanted to make sure that we can never do is forget to be able to recognize that this is the time when a lot of football GMs and scouts will actually kind of get their work done. The NFL scouts have been working in the background. The general managers have been focusing on the team. This is kind of the shift that we get to see. And the biggest area where that shift takes place is usually around Senior Bowl week. So there's always news that comes out of the Senior Bowl. Every year, it feels like there is a level of truth that we get to hear when all of these scouts get together. They had to go and get steak and a beer. They'll start sharing pieces of information. Then during the rest of the process, people talk about smoke all the time. I remember back in the 2019 draft, they were like, oh, Cardinals could take Kyler Murray. Pfft, that's just smoke. They're trying to get someone to trade up, or they'll take a Nick Bosa. And turns out sometimes there is actually fire where that is smoke. One of the things I think that we can't forget about also is that the Cardinals have been operating under the Steve Keim draft process, the Steve Keim philosophy, and even the Steve Keim draft board. In a interview with Dave Pasch last year, Michael Bidwell said that the Cardinals are going through a new scouting system. Essentially, think of it like the way you grade players, the way that you're going to score, and even some of the way you prioritize. It had not changed for their scouting department from what Michael Bidwell said since the 70s. So you're talking about Steve Keim spending 20 or so years in that scouting department, the scouting department not really changing that much as far as for how they drafted. Now you've got this new Patriots, this Titans type of scouting system. Last year we got to see the picks change a bit, but the grades and the scouts were already done. Marcus, this may be the first true year as a result of the Monty Ford era when it comes to scouting and evaluating players in the way that Monty would want to evaluate players, and that's exciting to me.
Yeah, they prioritize a little bit of different positions. That's pretty obvious. They mostly draft in the trenches and they do it in volume. So they do pick like defensive tackles and offensive linemen, and they scatter it all throughout the draft. So, and they also know how to develop those players. So that's the reason why they always have some sort of success, at least higher rate of success when it comes to drafting in those positions, because they know what they're looking for and then they know what they want from them and how to develop those players.
Absolutely. So let's go and talk a little bit now at the Senior Bowl. Obviously, we talked about how there's news that goes out. Players will also get together, and there will be a lot of prospects that will boost their stock at the Senior Bowl. This obviously is one of the last years that will not feature underclassmen, which is a little bit give or take or so. It's one of those weird spots where it's truly the NFL draft nerds who are essentially watching Senior Bowl practice updates. But let's talk a little bit about some of the guys who actually boosted their stock this week and when may help and hurt. And one of the first guys, at least, is a guy with a local connection, and Spencer Rattler. Rattler has actually played his high school football in Phoenix. He ended up going to Oklahoma, ended up starting for a few games before losing his starting job to the presumed number one overall pick, Caleb Williams. That's one of the things coming out of the Senior Bowl is it does not seem like the Chicago Bears are at least going to trade back, or if they do, it would take a generational type of draft haul to do so. That seems to be pretty much kind of pushing most teams out of the running. But yeah, Rattler went to Pinnacle High School for the most part, maybe the most talented high school quarterback out of the state of Arizona that we've ever seen. Threw for 11,000 yards, 116 passing touchdowns, rushed for 1,000 yards, and he probably would be, if it was not for Brock Purdy, maybe you could say the most accomplished Arizona quarterback coming into this year that you could talk about. But at the NFL, I should say NFL scouting, the Senior Bowl, he looked really good. He was able to show a lot of accuracy on the deep throws, showed off that cannon for an arm that we got to see a bit back at Oklahoma and a bit at South Carolina. This is something, Marcos, that I think it's not even so much as Spencer Rattler's stock being boosted, so much as some of the stock going down for a few other guys, most notably Michael Penix Jr. and Bo Nix, both seniors with the extra year of eligibility. They weren't nearly as impressive as Spencer Rattler, and those are guys that I think, Marcos, people have talked about. Could they go somewhere in the as high as the top 15? Could they go late first round? Do they go day 2 or 3? The fact that they really didn't put on as much of a show is something that makes me wonder if the Cardinals want to trade back from pick 27 and someone trade up for one of these quarterbacks. Unfortunately, they didn't really do a whole lot to inspire confidence that the Cardinals could make a move back into the second round with one of those teams.
Yeah, that's actually pretty interesting, especially since I thought Spencer Rattler was like out of the talk completely. Nobody had even mentioned him as one of the top QBs, and that's the reason why a game like in these type of all star like games for the NCAA, they showcase a lot because they put out in on film, and these it's not like these players aren't out there. They're not out there like in the Pro Bowl where they're not giving it their all. They're giving it their all. They're playing because they want to raise their stock and they have a lot, to have to do with a either, hey,
Mm,
this guy looked really impressive during this game. Hey, this brings up his stock now. That means he might jump over some players that he wasn't going to jump over originally. That puts him in the position where he'll get drafted somewhere around here, maybe in the second round, maybe in third round. Maybe there's some more consideration for him. And you know what? It's actually good for him because I heard he fell off the map. He was supposed to be one of the elite QBs, and it just wasn't working out with Lincoln Riley. And then ever since then, I haven't heard a single peep from him. So I'm glad,
yeah.
I'm happy for him that he's at least brought up his stock somewhat and is starting to get conversation around him as a serious consideration.
Yeah, I think it's more likely that he goes day 2 or 3. There's some Cardinals fans who actually had suggested maybe the Cardinals could bring in a better option from what we at least saw. They drafted the fifth round rookie Clayton Tune, obviously. He's just not going to be a guy, I think, that his traits are too good for him to fall to day 3. And if he falls to day 3 because of other questions, at least, whether it's character injury issues, you're probably not going to want to make the investment anyway, or a team is going to make that investment, which I think is great. One other player, at least Brandon Fisk, at least, was actually, this is one of the things that's funny, he became the first player to be traded at the Senior Bowl. The national team had a lot of injuries on the defensive line. That was something, at least, that stood out, was a couple of defensive linemen I would have liked to have seen kind of play the whole week ended up getting hurt. So he actually moved to the other side of the ball for the most part, and he ended up actually having a solid week overall. Cardinals really do need some defensive linemen overall. The biggest thing I think, obviously, is when you talk about measurables, some guys are able to make the best use of their measurables. You think of those long arm pass rushers who can kind of just push guys back. You can't really get your hands on their chest as a lineman. He's got shorter arms for the most part. Some guys with shorter arms are able to, with some of their quickness and some violent hands, make use of it. Other guys, you end up kind of seeing them be good in some places, but not against the run. he went up against future NFL talent. That's pretty good, I think, for the most part, with someone like Fisk. And then also with another player that I feel like on the defensive side, I've seen some Cardinals fans talk about. Jarvis Brownlee Jr. was one that had a really fun interception, at least that was there. He basically had a leaping grab for the most part, and he's had a really good week overall. The Cardinals need a cornerback as well. The fact that we've had a cornerback and a defensive lineman that have stood out at the Senior Bowl, and the fact that what we've seen with the Cardinals in the past, if they've liked Senior Bowl guys, they've liked team captains. It will be interesting to be able to see exactly if the Cardinals pick maybe not the highest cornerback, maybe not the highest defensive lineman. They usually will go younger, but guys like this who just sometimes need that chance to stand out and are doing it, I do think that's cool to see with both this defensive lineman and with Brownlee Jr.
Yeah, so, I mean that's been a position of need for like so long for the Cardinals, and they have tried drafting some players into that position, just haven't developed them well. I would be curious to see what his measurables are because I'm not really familiar with Jarvis Brownlee. How tall is he?
Yeah, Jarvis Brownlee Jr. is listed at 6 foot, 190 pounds, which is kind of what I would call, unless you're an
Yeah,
exceptional cornerback. That's usually a big corner if you're going to have that size and then some good arm length. A lot of
your arm
times,
length is important.
yeah, a lot of things, at least with corners, are you want to find lengthy corners, and then you also need to have that change of pace, the direction. Sometimes you can have smaller guys who line up at cornerback and can play on the outside. It's just usually a little harder because then you're like, all right, we're going to send this cornerback who's, 5'9" and 180 pounds, and you got 6'2", 220-pound A.J. Brown lined up against him. Like, that's where having a bigger cornerback who's got some length is something that can really be helpful if you are if you're a cornerback, because you're able to not just necessarily beat the guy at the line, but if you can recover quickly and be able to break up the pass, that's something that really can help stand out as well for your stock. So he's expected to go probably somewhere around day two, is what it seems like for the most part. Sometimes guys at smaller schools like Louisville can have some issues. Let's go through with some of Daniel Jeremiah's top guys. He also had Braden Fisk from Florida State, the defensive tackle, on there. We talked about the Cardinals and their wide receiver room. They entered this last year, and the idea was they have a number one in Hollywood Brown. They drafted their number two in Michael Wilson. They have Rondale Moore mixed with Greg Dortch at the slot receiver position, and they increased the tight end usage as the season went on for Trey McBride. I think that the Cardinals, in this respect, Marcos, probably should draft another receiver given some of the injuries that plagued Michael Wilson his first year. It's one of those weird places where you want to be confident in him, while at the same time recognizing that if they do have one of these top receivers go down, if Hollywood Brown leaves, you're probably going to be looking at a wide receiver either at number 4 overall, assuming they don't take an offensive lineman, or regardless, a rookie is your top guy. And then it's likely going to be Rondale Moore and Greg Dortch if you're not able to bring back Hollywood Brown on a shorter term deal. Corley is someone who I think is going to go a bit early, but when you're talking about skill sets that they have for the most part, he's a guy that essentially gets to catch the ball, break tackles, and run. There's a little hint of, I would say, Malik Neighbors in his game. Neighbors is a guy who can have the speed to get deep, running good routes, and also can catch, break a tackle, and pick up that extra 5 or 6 yards that are so important. Marcos, are there other receivers, at least, that you know of that you've found some either interest in, or is it even an option for the Cardinals to, if they do end up seeing Marvin Harrison Jr. fall to 4, if they do take a receiver at 4, should they even spend another pick on a wide receiver before day 3?
Yeah, you you do need a like a tackle breaker at the very least. And right now, as we see, I think the only person that I can see as a solidified tackle breaker is sometimes Rondale Moore. Greg Dortch is a good tackle breaker. Michael Wilson, I've seen him break some tackles as well. But you need that yak, like that yak person. If he's being dubbed as the yak king, that only adds to the offense when it comes to like. And I know people are just they hate the term screens, especially since like Cliff Kingsbury was like, they always dub him like the Screensbury and whatnot, but you do have to have that in your game because of the fact that like it is part of like the extension of the run game. So when you are able to get somebody who is like a tackle breaking, yak king, and whatnot, it opens up your offense in many ways. You do know that you can always count on him to be able to get that extra 5 yards on the play, or maybe even break off a big play off of just throwing a screen pass to him, makes somebody miss at the line of scrimmage and then takes off.
Yep.
So
No,
I'm
I
actually excited for
totally
this guy.
agree. No, very exciting, at least for the most part, with some of these different players. Another guy,
I
at
want him.
least, Taliese Fuaga and Tyler Guyton were two other players out there we go, who are both offensive tackles that are expected to go inside of round one. A lot of times when it comes to offensive tackles, this is kind of how the NFL works. A guy will show up at tackle in college, you'll see the athleticism, and when their arms are a bit shorter, people wonder, hey, can they move inside to guard? Are those long arm pass rushers going to be too much? Fuaga actually looked really good for the most part at 332, moved super well while the arms were a bit shorter. A lot of people, at least, were impressed with how he was able to handle the edge at the Senior Bowl this week. I think that he's a guy that may actually go out of the Cardinals' range, unfortunately. So the Cardinals picking at 27 with a guy that's that weight and that athletic, and obviously we'll see when the NFL Combine comes across where these guys can sometimes show off their athleticism. If he's going to look like a solid right or left tackle, may end up going in the top 15 picks. One of the takeaways was with guys like Fuaga and Tyler Guyton. He actually is a guy who had one full season, but he's very much kind of reminiscent of Lane Johnson in some of those ways. Lane Johnson, the longtime stud tackle for the Philadelphia Eagles, started off as a tight end, ended up not having as much one real season at Oklahoma, but the athleticism translated into the NFL. And as soon as they drafted him in the 2013 draft, he's had a decade of great play. I could see Tyler Guyton be the same way. He also seems like he's moved up from being a top 15 pick in mobile. One player, at least, who has not seemingly looked like a top 15 pick in mobile is coming out of the University of Arizona offensive tackle Jordan Morgan. He's had a little bit shorter arms and also didn't have the best week of practice, especially when compared to Fuaga and Guyton. Marcos, I think as a Cardinals fan, I'm looking at that roster, looking at this being a great tackle class. Part of me is hoping the Cardinals can address defense with that second pick because that's where the talent is. But it feels like some of these offensive tackles have actually risen out of maybe that late first round hype. They may go a bit higher. I don't know if the Cardinals can afford to trade as high as some of these people will go. But if the Cardinals are looking for an offensive tackle and one happens to fall, that seems to be solid here. Do you think that with the offensive tackle group as it is, with that pick 27 or maybe even that second round pick, I think may be the better option. With the Cardinals taking a tackle this year after taking one last year, was that a good move, do you think? Or should the Cardinals be looking more at kind of waiting a year, free agency route? With Guyton and Fuaga, I think it's a no brainer if they are there. I'm just not convinced that they will be.
All right, sorry about that.
Oh, no worries. Getting that headset on, at least for the most part, is always a plus when it's here on the Redbird Reboot podcast. So,
My apologies. Can you hear me?
you are
My
all
thing
set
just
to
went
go.
out. Yeah,
All set,
my
sir.
my earpiece just died as soon as I. So
Uh,
the idea of taking tackles every single year is actually a good idea. Um, so my thing is like some from what I'm looking at and from what I'm like investigating or researching is that like you can't go like one draft without selecting a tackle, and that's just a
mm,
situation, or like an offensive lineman in general, because of the fact that you want to build that position and then start like building a pipeline so
yep.
that that way you can get these players to not have to go get thrown into the wolves like right away and be in a situation where oh hey this guy has to go out and play day one, and now with the practice restrictions, the learning curve has gotten worse for these tackles to be able to
Yep.
ascend and to be able to develop. So the more often that you draft these offensive linemen and throw them out to the wolves, the harder it is for them to develop properly. So, and we're talking about tackles in the second, third, and fourth round. Of course, we're not
Mm-hmm.
talking about like first round tackles. You can take those when you have needs, of course, because the whole point of those is like they come out and you're supposed to be able to play them day one, but you're not going to do that every single round, because if you do that every single round, you may be pushing off other needs that you might need. And so as far as like this guy, the 6'7", 128
Mm,
pounds, and he has rare athleticism. This is a
yeah.
project guy.
Whew.
But I don't think he, like it says, top 15 pick. Yeah,
Yeah.
we probably aren't
They
gonna
don't
be able
draft
to get him.
they Yeah, they don't draft players a lot of times from what they've done in college. You draft them what they can be as far as in the NFL. And like even Kyler Murray, he had 1 year where he basically burned that red shirt and played and then only started for one other year in college football. So it's very interesting to me to be able to see that these are guys who don't have as much experience, but again, a lot of coaches will believe, hey, I can take that guy, coach him up, be able to actually have that solid playmaking ability that you're able to see. And some guys we will see translate well, others it takes a year. A lot of guys, at least, are rookies there. Some other players, at least overall, that I think did pretty well. The cornerback Quinion Mitchell looks very much like he's going to end up being a first round pick. He looked like the best defensive player at the Senior Bowl. There's another one, at least, who probably flashed enough that he could end up seeing his stock rise a bit. We'll talk about him in a second on the defensive line, as he's one of my favorite prospects that's there. Quinion Mitchell has had a lot of fans who wanted to see him be late first as far as for the Cardinals going. The guy who I was mentioning, at least, that was Darius Robinson. He was one of the guys, at least, that showed up really well. Here they're going to at least show a little highlight of him. This is from Billy M91, who does a good job, at least, of being able to clip up highlights and covering. He's talking about looking at Darius Robinson lined up at the three technique. And the three technique is one of the guys, at least where you're talking about, that's going to be here as far as getting the sack. Lines up with the three technique, touches the quarterback. Remember, the red is a non contact type of area, but he lines up. He's a little bit on the smaller side, but he's able to beat the guard and touch the quarterback enough to be able to have it as a sack during that drill. If you get a guy who's a three technique, who's maybe not going to be a run stuffing guy, but he can line up outside on the edge because again, he's an edge rusher. You line up a guy who can go inside or outside, you get those JJ Watt comps at least. I think Watt obviously is like a Hall of Famer, but having that same flexibility there, you can say, hey, we know that they just got a backup tackle in, and we've been able to shift this guy into guard. Let's rush a couple people there, make sure we get a stunt. Having the ability for that defensive tackle guy who's lined up to run around is something that's super cool. I think at least for NFL defensive coordinators, excuse me, to be able to use. It's going to be, I think, at least a fun prospect, and I think that he is probably going to end up going at least a little bit higher than people are mocking him right now, which is going to be a spot that means that the Cardinals have to take one of those guys. They may have to take him early, unfortunately.
Yeah, I really like the size of this guy, and that get off the line of scrimmage and him getting his pads lower than the guard at the point of attack. That's like good fundamentals right there. Well, actually, he didn't really get him lower than the guard, but he still seemed to like outrun him on the outside and be able to like outmaneuver him to be able to get to the quarterback. So that's like pretty good
Mm-hmm.
fundamentals right there. And like I said, I like the size, and I'm actually starting to want to shift to more of like a, hands down on the defensive line,
Mm-hmm.
more than just like we've been used to having the two outside linebackers standing up at a 2 point stance, and I think I want to kind of start shifting to like a 3 point stance for these guys towards the outside, which is a 4-3 type of a look, because it
Yeah.
looks like when you get lower, like some of the best like outside linebackers out there, they start at a 3 point stance because they want to get
Mm-hmm.
low to the ground and stuff. So I look at that and I'm like, that looks pretty good, man. Like I like how he's at that 3 point stance, getting off the line of scrimmage, and then of course being able to outmaneuver the guard for a sack.
Yeah, that's one thing that I think is really going to be the biggest investment needed for the Cardinals is that defensive line. It's going to be all starting up front at least. That's something that was just depleted over time for Arizona. Let's talk a little bit about. There's a couple of other things that were some takeaways. One of the positions which I thought was really interesting that we didn't end up seeing was the running back position. So with the running backs, for the most part, some of what's been coming out of the Senior Bowl has been saying that this is a pretty weak running back class overall. Right now, as far as the rankings go, there really is not a lot of running backs are expected to go as high as we've seen in years past. Last year, of course, 2 running backs made it into the first round. This year, it seems like that there's kind of a mixture of some people are looking at a couple of these guys and think that they could go in the second round. Some people think that there's running backs who are just not going to go until day 3. So the top 2 guys this year, neither of them were at the Senior Bowl. There was Jonathan Brooks and Trey Benson out of Texas and Florida State, respectively. I have Benson as the guy who I think is the most likely to be the first one taken. Good big running back. Bucky Irving is another one out of Oregon, but none of these guys are anywhere close to what we saw with one of the best running back prospects in Bijan Robinson. And of course, the impactful Jahmyr Gibbs, who went last year. The Cardinals may not need a starting running back. I do think that getting a nice backup in there to be a complement to what they already have on their roster with James Conner, with getting the other running back from the New York Jets, at least that we got to see later in the season. And then, of course, talking about Amari DiMercato, that became a strength as the season went on. Michael Carter was, I believe, the name.
Card.
With James Conner getting closer to 30 years old, with Michael Carter just being an acquisition, there's probably another running back that the Cardinals could take this year. One thing that I found interesting as a prospect was a similar prospect to Amari DiMercato, Imani Bailey, who was a TCU running back, same school, same type of system. He actually showed up in the area where he was able to get some runs. He's about 5'7" overall. Was able to go and get a lot of great plays in, which is really fun. I think he's maybe a little bit small, but if you're talking about a day 3 running back, Marcos, that's probably the guy that I would say that you'd want to use. And there's some great highlights, at least, of him being able to make some shifts in open space, being able to get some nice first downs. And I really think that we're going to probably see the Cardinals take a running back. What's a bummer is it's just not the class if you're going to maybe find that James Conner replacement outside of those top 1 to 2 guys. Cardinals have a ton of needs. I think, Marcos, we can kind of comfortably say after the Senior Bowl that the Cardinals may draft a running back, but it's probably not going to be at pick 27. It ain't going to be in the second round, at least, maybe unless they take one of those 2 guys. You may be talking about going into that last year of James Conner's contract or giving him maybe an extension. You're going to want to make sure that you're not going to be missing a lot when he goes down, and you want to have a guy that's on that roster. If there's not going to be that guy, you may have to just say, hey, we may have to wait till next year and see if we can get a better draft class there overall.
Yeah, I would wait till next year. If it's not, if the top 2 guys are the only ones that are worth taking, I mean, you could take a project one in the 6th round or 7th round, but I would just wait till next year because I have some confidence that James Conner can still give us another year of production. It's just his injuries have always been the issue. He's always he's never really always available there. So DiMercato, he actually impressed me from last year. So he kind of has somewhat of the similar traits as the James Conner. They're both top heavy. He's a good pass protector as well.
Mm-hmm.
He uses leverage well. And of course, Michael Carter, I'm a big fan of. I love Michael Carter Jr., so he's the shifty guy. So, I mean, I think we're set, or at least we're pretty good for the next year. So I would just wait.
Yeah, I think it's more of if there's just going to be day 3 guys that are decent. I do agree with you that seems to be the best case scenario for the Cardinals. Some other players, at least, that did well at the Senior Bowl with stock up and stock down. One of them would be Jackson Powers. I believe it was, let me actually make sure I get the name right. Jackson Powers Johnson showed out at the center position. Last year, I was a big fan of John Michael Schmitz, which is another 3-name center. He had a rough first year overall for the Giants. He ended up actually being able to look like a solid future starter, but there were some errors and some miscues for the most part. The Giants' offensive line as a whole was not that great. He did get better over as the season. The issue with Jackson Powers Johnson is if you're a Cardinals fan that's looking at the team and saying, hey, we need an interior offensive lineman, maybe getting a guy in here who is a tough center, moving one of the other guys around, signing a guard, maybe you get that long-term center. I think that he pushed himself into that first round center range, and I don't know if he's going to be there at 27. He had a great week at the Senior Bowl. He looks like a monster on tape. I think that you're going to go into next year with Hjalte Froholt and be confident that he's going to be able to do a good job. and probably could draft an interior offensive lineman. You've got John Gaines Jr. obviously will come off of IR, get a chance. You'll probably draft another guy, but it does feel like that there's not a guy who's kind of pushed himself high enough to be able to say that they're going to go in an interior lineman direction at 27. Feels much more like you're either going to take a tackle, a defensive lineman, or maybe more of a cornerback. Now let's talk again about one of these other players that leads to, like, this is going to be like the last one, I think, at least. There's a lot of questions about, hey, the Cardinals receiver spot. Should they take a receiver at 4 and then double down, take a receiver again? That's what some people have wondered. One of the guys that could be potentially available there in that spot would be Ladd McConkey out of Georgia. He shows out similarly this week to Cooper Kupp when you're talking about having a lot of deep speed, being able to get separation at the line, being able to have great hands. You can see that he's laying out for the most part on an inaccurate throw, being able to get open on some of these comeback routes with great footwork. And then even in a spot where he's able to seemingly lose his balance, he recovers and is able to get there. It's one of the spots where, as far as it comes to talent, Marcos, I was that guy in 2020 saying, hey, Cardinals should take CD Lamb at 8. They go and traded for DeAndre Hopkins. I looked at the rest of that roster and went, okay, Hakeem Butler, he was lucky to kind of like make it back for season 2. He looked absolutely terrible in camp. He's a 6'4" guy that a 5'9" corner who was undrafted was bullying. Andy Isabella just did not have the hands that were needed. Keyshawn Johnson was slower. The biggest takeaway I had that year was, hey, you should take CD Lamb, get DeAndre Hopkins too, and then in a couple years when Hopkins has to go, you can pay CD Lamb. You got wide receiver locked up for a while. Do you think that would be an approach the Cardinals could take or should take, or are there maybe greater needs that are left there for them to invest in?
That's kind of tough. I mean, I like the shiftiness of this wide receiver. One thing that we got to note is like almost all wide receivers look good at on one-on-ones against the corners
Yeah.
because like they have all the field to work with. But I like his I like how he plants his foot and he's able to like kind of use that leverage. So he completely fools his corner on that route right there, makes it look like he's gonna
Yeah.
go outside, cuts it back
Goes back
inside and
in.
whatnot. And then
Beautiful.
of course the comeback, because that's important right there. That comeback that you just saw, that's what like Kyler Murray needs in a wide receiver. He's taller frame,
Mhm.
so if he's able to plant his foot, come back to the ball, that's like Kyler Murray's specialty is throwing those back shoulder fades or those comeback routes. So I mean that's something that I mean I would take him, to be honest with you. I mean I know it's kind of weird to say like I mean you're gonna take a receiver probably in the first round. You're gonna take one
Yeah.
later on and stuff. I was like, yeah, why not? I mean, you need weapons on the outside, and if it comes to be that Hollywood doesn't get signed, which I hope that's the case. Like, I want
Mm.
Greg Dortch to get more time. You still need some like big receivers to be able to like fill those fill those lanes coming in as developmental receivers that can take over when you need them to.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that it's also, as some people have said, if you could get a high enough draft pick where someone says, hey, we want Marvin Harrison Jr., we'll give you next year's first round pick to move up there to 4 for him, and you're able to kind of move back 1 or 2 spots, and you maybe end up taking your tackle. And then maybe you say, hey, we could get a guy like McConkey. We've got some picks. We could move back up if we don't think he's going to be there. That is another way of building your team. And I think that these are possibilities where, when it comes to scouting, on one hand, there's the talent that's on field. On the other, there is the ability to recognize you don't know everything in the draft. Like, you may end up seeing that 2 quarterbacks go 1, 2. Suddenly, if the Patriots take a guy at 3 and you're not able to trade back, all of a sudden it's like you're not just going to say, oh, well, we lost this draft. There are options, I think, that are available at least. And this is, again, one of the best wide receiver classes in years. If the Cardinals do have a chance to get the best one of those, then that's going to be a huge win for them. And from what we've seen, at least at the Senior Bowl, there's probably not one of those other quarterbacks who performed well enough to go in the late first to where a team would trade up for them. If there's just 3 guys that you're looking at, and all 3 of those teams seem to be looking to upgrade their quarterback position, that's something that I think is really going to be interesting to find out if there is just going to be 1, 2, 3. Do the Cardinals look at doubling up? Do they keep confidence in Michael Wilson heading into year 2? I think that as of for right now, I would not do that second receiver spot. But if you're in a place saying, hey, we no, Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to the Pats. People are not willing to trade up, at least to us. We know Joe Alt is like one of the guys who's graded out super well on our board. Then I think that's another great option for the Arizona Cardinals to be able to have. Some other cases as far as being able to look at with the Senior Bowl and the stock up and stock down with how everything is shaken out, there's a couple other receivers who didn't have great weeks. Xavier Leggett and Devontae Walker. Walker being the number one wide receiver for Drake May at UNC. He had a rough week for the most part, when you can at least see that even though he looked pretty decent in college, when he got guys who were a lot more physical on him, he really struggled to be able to get separation, to be physical. That was something at least that was really interesting to see, along with Xavier Leggett. Xavier Leggett was a guy that really a lot of people liked. He had a lot of size, a lot of ability, at least that we were able to see at South Carolina. And he ended up coming in a little bit shorter, and he was more of projected to be, hey, he's a big bodied X receiver. Well, he couldn't separate, couldn't really get down one on one. You talk about a lot of times there are guys that will be that typical X. You think of like how DeAndre Hopkins with Cliff Kingsbury. He's in one on one coverage. You look off the safety, throw that deep ball up to him, and he'll jump and get the ball there. That was what Larry Fitzgerald did in his first few years in the NFL. But over time, we've seen the league shift and adjust. Now you can't just be that guy because coverages are too good. Cornerbacks are able to recover. You have to be able to find a way to be able to get open to get that separation. Leggett's stock is probably falling a little bit, I think, as a result there. That's one of the things I think that we'll see is a couple of these receivers have moved up, some have moved down. And at the end of the day, Marcos, the Senior Bowl is a great way for people to show off their talent, and something I think that's important for measuring. The bigger thing, of course, is going to be the interviews. This is the first chance that a lot of NFL GMs get to talk about players, talk to those players, and it's very exciting to be able to, hear some of that news before you kind of enter that mock draft season spot here. The only other player I think, at least they said, did pretty well at the Senior Bowl that I think is worth mentioning is the interior offensive lineman Christian Hayes. He was consistent, 6'2", 318 pounds. The player that he was in college, a lot of people, I believe, was that he played at tackle, but people are projecting him as a guard at the next level. He looks like he's one of those guys that if you're in the Cardinals in the top of the second round, you can go ahead and get him. I would definitely make that move. That's kind of it for our Senior Bowl coverage. We'll have probably a little bit more we can talk about later, but I did want to at least take this time to check out the updated mock draft. Right now, Marcos, it seems like even as of today, the news coming out from Ian Rappaport, Adam Schefter, it's seemingly very unlikely the Chicago Bears will trade back. It does feel like Drake May. There's been some questions if he's going to go at pick number 2 or pick number 3. I think that he still ends up going in the top 3 overall. This mock draft has Jaden Daniels then still going to the New England Patriots and Tankathon.com. Cardinals grabbing Marvin Harrison Jr. with their first pick, and then with that second pick, having Byron Murphy, the defensive lineman out of Texas, is their other pick. Some interesting things that I've seen, at least for the most part, Talise Fuaga goes from the late first round up a bit higher. We see Terrion Arnold go up from pick, I think it was somewhere in the late, being the second cornerback taken, all the way to above Kool-Aid McKinstry. And we see Brock Bowers going in the top 5. I will be very curious to see how high Brock Bowers goes, as he's super productive, great talented player, but I don't think he has that generational size that other people do. What are some of your thoughts, at least, Marcos, with looking through some of what the latest mock drafts have been coming out of the Senior Bowl?
Yeah, the movement on the back end is really interesting to see what's going on with that cornerback, because it was almost unifiedly seen as like Kool-Aid McKinstry was going to be the guy that was going to be the first pick as far as like cornerbacks are concerned, and he was overtaken by Ashley, his teammate, and whatnot. Really like seeing Marvin Harrison Jr. still there at the Cardinals being mocked there, because I've seen some mock drafts where Marvin Harrison goes to like 3rd overall, and I've seen this YouTuber's channel for a while just saying like, why would you want to move off of Mac Jones? And he's playing up Mac Jones. He's saying, oh, he has really great processing speed and blah, blah, blah. And like, yeah, what would be a better idea is for you to pair him off with like a great wide receiver like Marvin Harrison Jr. I'm like, oh God, don't start rallying the troops over there and having them like chant for like Mac Jones to come back. And of course, we have
Yeah,
Chicago wanted to stay with their quarterback instead of trying to draft Caleb Williams. And it's like, guys, come on, don't start like this. This is the type of stuff that makes me nervous. Like, don't start messing up the order here. Come on, like you stick
right.
with your quarterbacks. We don't need one. We're good. We want to be able to have the pick of the litter of non-quarterback picks and have our choice of it. If it's Marvin, it's Marvin. If it's somebody else, then it's somebody else. But you guys stand pat. You guys are rebuilding. As far as the Chicago Bears, you guys pass up a quarterback, then that's going to be to the detriment of your team if they become great other places, because
Mhm.
we've seen. And I really like the quarterback. I keep forgetting what his name is. The quarterback from the Chicago Bears. I really like his
Oh,
personality.
Fields.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Justin Fields. So I,
good
I like
dude.
his personality, but like and we heard EJ say he doesn't believe he's going to have success in Chicago. He believes
Yeah.
he'll have success other places.
No, I agree. That was our interview, at least with EJ Snyder, obviously from a little while ago. You can always re-listen to that on the Redbird Reboot YouTube channel if you want to go and follow that as well. I think, Marcos, we can at least shift and talk now a little bit about just some of the newest mock drafts that have popped up within round one and rounds two. There are some interesting surprises that have come out as far as looking at one particular player has taken a, I wouldn't say meteoric rise, but it seems like as far as it goes with quarterback one, two, three, quarterback four, some people wondered could that be Michael Penix Jr., could it be Bo Nix? The guy who seems to have had his stock rise the most has been JJ McCarthy out of Michigan, the Jim Harbaugh's guy, he said is like the best quarterback he's ever seen play at Michigan, which is, I think, kind of a tongue in cheek thing because that's, of course, where Tom Brady went to college. It seems like with enough teams that need quarterbacks this year, the Atlanta Falcons, the Vikings, potentially, depending on what goes on with Kirk Cousins, the a team even like the Seattle Seahawks picking the 16th. There's a lot of teams that probably need to upgrade the position. Even a team like the New York Giants, who I think are probably stuck in that Daniel Jones spot, similar to how the Cardinals were with Kyler this year. If they just say, hey, we don't have that belief that the Cardinals have in Kyler Murray, we could go and take a quarterback. That's what we, I think, are wanting, is to have more of that talent get pushed down the rest of the roster. But that was one of the other big things. I think that if you're going to be someone who is going to like actually want to put some money on the draft or do some of those, right now the stock seems like, at least from someone we've had on the previous Revenge of the Birds podcast, and Ben Albright has been one of the people who's been showing this, and we've actually seen some of that stock manage to rise. I'm very curious, at least, to see what we're going to get out of the NFL draft this year, Marcos. The Senior Bowl is one step of that. Next one is going to be the NFL Combine, and of course, can't wait for that. Let's wrap up with our show today, going over the Super Bowl. Of course, we've got a matchup between the two teams in the San Francisco 49ers and the Kansas City Chiefs. And Marcos, we've already talked about this. I'm rooting for the Chiefs in this one. I think you're rooting for the Chiefs in this one. You'd love to see Brock Purdy have a great game. A lot of the NFL, it feels like, as far as all the other fan bases, are looking at the Niners going, please save us from another Patrick Mahomes or from some Taylor Swift, Travis Kelce type of a setup. What are some of your thoughts, at least going in to the game itself? What do you think that we're going to see as far as some of the game on the field? Do you have a favorite you feel like in this between the Niners or the underdog Kansas City Chiefs?
I mean, like we're in the position where we don't have the luxury to be able to say, "Hey, let's not please stop the Chiefs from winning the Super Bowl again," because we're their rivals. So it's like y'all can go ahead and cheer for the 49ers to beat the Chiefs because you guys are tired of it, but you guys aren't their direct rivals, where we are their direct rivals in division. So of course we're gonna be like, yeah, we come on, do whatever you can to just like not make it be a situation where they're hoisting the Lombardi Trophy. And yeah, it is kind of annoying that like Taylor Swift gets panned over to. I'm surprised they're not gonna have her do the Super Bowl like halftime show because she's already
Right.
there, part of them. She's gonna be wearing a Chiefs jersey, so it's like, hey, why don't you just come over and then be part of the halftime show? So, um, obviously, like this is kind of like interesting to know that this Chiefs team, the way it was built, is a different type of Chiefs team that we're used to, and there's some
Yeah,
things that like are kind of weird to be able to say, but like kind of fall into place. So Andy Reid, like I mentioned so many times before, he's one of the founding fathers of the air raid. He's part of it. He was there when it got, like when it became an idea, then it became an offense and whatnot. So being that Patrick Mahomes came from that air raid type of system and then came to a coach who like pretty much like he his philosophy is like take anything that the defense gives you and it's all about efficiency and productivity. I had no idea that Patrick Mahomes was such a like a quarterback that not only threw a ton of screens but threw a lot of short passes and got rid of the
yeah,
ball quickly. Sounds like Tom
true.
Brady to me, and he's actually out Tom Bradying
Mm,
Tom Brady in that facet. So like, and their offense, as far as like weapons are concerned, they don't have the best weapons out there, but
yeah,
their defense has been carrying that team. Their defense has been playing out of their minds. I love Spags as like an old veteran type of defensive coordinator type of coach that understands
yeah,
defense and knows how to shift. He's got that team playing like insane when it comes to like just being able to be like a top defensive unit. When you think about the Chiefs, you think about them being all offense. So they're going up against a team that like I've heard that is favored, which is the 49ers because of the amount of weapons and like everything that they have going on for themselves on defense as well. So
yeah.
those two aspects are what's going to be interesting. Is it going to be a defensive slugfest? There could be a possibility that might be the thing. We might not see a high scoring game here.
Yeah, I know. Right now, the Niners are 2-point favorites, which means they're expecting to be a close game. The over/under is set at about 47.5, so at 48 points or so. So if you want to do the math with us real quick there, that means that you're talking about 48 minus 2, divide that by 2. So you're talking about 46 divided by 2. All right, so you're talking about a 25-23 type of game for the over/under. That makes a lot of sense to me. I feel like this is a game in which we've seen both of these teams have studs on defense. Obviously, Fred Warner, Nick Bosa, and on the Chiefs side, they're missing one of their defensive linemen. They're also missing Joe Tooney, their guard. But when it comes to Patrick Mahomes, the fact of the matter is that this is a quarterback league, quarterback driven part of that league is going to be the guy who can basically step up and make the most plays, but it's also about giving that quarterback time through the run game. This is a place where Brock Purdy, in my opinion, is going to be facing a defense that shut down Lamar Jackson. You're going to be seeing a team that is experienced with a quarterback who's experienced in these playoff scenarios. I think that the biggest shift in this game will be it comes down to can the Niners force a turnover of the Chiefs and kind of hold on with Mahomes because we all have seen it. He can drive a team back. We saw it in the Super Bowl, in the 2020 Super Bowl, where he was down by 10 points in the fourth quarter. They were able to come back and win that game. I think that in this one, I would lean for the Chiefs being able to be that team because I do think that Chris Jones and what they have on the defensive line against the Steve Wilkes defense, which we've seen be susceptible, the Niners needed to have a miraculous comeback against the Lions defense, which wasn't the strength of their team. They also were having to go in their first round of the playoffs, and they played against, I believe it was the Packers. They only won that game because the Packers missed a field goal. Marcos, this is a game that I think belongs to the Chiefs. I think that this is a game where I would not be surprised if the game is a little bit closer, like you said, on the defensive side. I think that it's going to be a 26-23 win for the Chiefs, but I think that it's going to be the Niners catching up some in the fourth quarter. What do you think could be a prediction for the game? And maybe we can go over then some of these other odds for who may score first, some of those different tendencies. What are some of your thoughts, at least, for how you could see this game playing out?
It's like I almost have the same type of prediction as you. It's going to be somewhere in the 20s. Like, and I would hope that the Chiefs are the ones who are on top of that. So I would say like what 25, 23, maybe 26 to 23 type of game where the Chiefs will win. That's my hope. Um, I think as far as like who's gonna like these type of predictions that we're going forth, I believe that I think the first possession, whoever has the first possession, that team's gonna
Mm,
score on their
yeah.
first possession. But I think it's gonna slow down after we go off that. But yeah, we can go into the rest of the predictions.
Yeah, so some of the other places is going to be the first TD scorer. I agree with you that the top two right now are Christian McCaffrey and Isaiah Pacheco. I think that there's some odds that are a little bit different. One of them being is that, you've got the Niners are a long shot at like 3,000 odds. So essentially you have to, if you bet $100, you'd win 3,000. That's what that means with the breakdown. The ones that are really interesting to me that I think are maybe some more long shots at the very, very end of the roster. One of those is oh, let me take a look at the name so I get it right here. Noah Gray, the tight end for the Kansas City Chiefs at plus 4,500. A guy like Christian McCaffrey and Isaiah Pacheco, the two starting running backs who they'll give it to on the goal line, are at 360 and 650. So you're talking about in the hundreds versus the 4,000. There could be a trick play that I could see that the Chiefs get down into the red zone. They basically use a play action fake. They're able to fake it essentially to the likes of Travis Kelce. He gets all the attention. Noah Gray, who's the blocking tight end, is able to sneak out, take advantage. We've seen with the Steve Wilkes defense that a lot of times teams would be able to run leak against them to a great effect. It is going to start with having to run the ball effectively, but if you're looking for a long shot there, that or a deep shot to Marquez Valdez-Scantling potentially. The Niners cornerbacks have not been as solid overall this year. They still are a very tough defense. That being said, I think those are some long shot odds. Are there any other players that you think of if we may not expect that could end up scoring? Maybe I don't know. Maybe a Brock Purdy rushing touchdown isn't out of the question.
Um, like because all the weapons on the 49ers, it's hard to pick which one and which one's going to be the unlikely guy. Maybe uh I'm not even sure, to be honest with you, on that side. On the
Mm-hmm.
Chiefs offensive side, I mean, maybe what is the guy's name from the Chiefs who keeps blowing games for them? The
Oh
guy,
no, Kadarius
Kadarius
Toney.
Toney.
Ooh.
Maybe Kadarius
uh,
Toney might be one of the
Gosh.
unlikely people. It would be a trick play to have
Yeah.
Kadarius be the guy who scores on the ball, because I don't know if they're going to be shading to him so much, or they're just going to expect him to do something like be offsides before the play starts, or have a situation where he fumbles the ball and then it bounces off and it goes to another player for a pick six or whatnot.
Yeah.
Who knows? But I mean, I would say that he would probably be the unlikely guy, because he was the unsung hero in last year's Super Bowl. If he didn't have
Mm-hmm.
that 65-yard punt return, the Chiefs probably don't even get that score against the Eagles and get to a position where they win by 3.
Yeah, I know one of the other areas for the Super Bowl, and this happened a few years ago, I believe, with Tom Brady in the Super Bowl, where there was actually a intentional grounding in the end zone that went for a safety. So the first points of the game being a essentially defensive score. Those are some pretty long odds. I think right now it's a no touchdown score. It's like 18,000. And then underneath that, of course, is Justin Ross, the one time Clemson prospect who has just not been able to, unfortunately, stick. The other thing that I find really interesting is that there's a couple of other Super Bowl specials you can look at. For some, this is with DraftKings, as far as who wins time of possession, the length of the longest drive. Are there going to be more passing touchdowns or field goals? There's some that you can usually find of like a Christian McCaffrey, one rushing touchdown, one receiving touchdown is some that you can look at. Now let's talk about also as we wrap up the last one, which of course is the Swifties in the Super Bowl. People are actually making bets based off of the Taylor Swift
Yeah.
appearance. So any quarter, at least for the most part, to have 22 points scored is one that's on there. You can also have Travis Kelce at least to be able to score an 8, which are an octopus, which would be he essentially gets the touchdown and then also gets the 2-point conversion. You're also talking at least about what they call the friendship bracelet, which is we saw a couple weeks ago Taylor Swift wearing a Travis Kelce jacket designed by the Niners. Kristen Juszczyk, the wife of Kyle Juszczyk, one of these kind of unsung heroes, a fullback in a dying age for the fullback. Either of those score the first touchdown, you can win some money. Do you think this is even a good idea, Marcos, or is this just kind of part of the fun of Super Bowl week in which a lot of people won't watch the game, won't care about the game. They'll be watching for the commercials, for the pizzazz. Is this something that you think is good for football fans, or is this something that you can't wait till we're over this part and we can get back to talking about the real pigskin stuff?
Well, that's like the prop bets, like that adds to like, oh hey, how ridiculous can this be? You want to bet on how many times like the Chiefs what color Gatorade will they dump on the coach, and they do some ridiculous ones like,
Ooh,
hey, will there be a fan who will like sneak in an animal sometime during the Super Bowl to cause it? Like, it's just, these are the prop bets, and it makes it kind of fun because I don't, personally speaking, I don't like try to gamble into that because like to me, I'm not really good at being able to pick what or where or what, but I heard these prop bets are what makes it and enhances the situation, because then yeah, that is something that you can bet on. You can bet on how many times Taylor Swift gets panned over. You can bet on what she might be like wearing, or like you can bet on the same thing with another, sideline, and when it comes to like making those prop bets and whatnot, it kind of engages them. And of course, we all know the ridiculousness of the commercials. That is what allures the fans, because for one day out of the year, the most like player people that don't even have any care about football whatsoever will be watching that game,
oh
and
yeah,
they're only interested in who's going to win. And a lot of times they'll pick by colors. They'll be like, oh, I like the color of those uniforms, I'll pick them to
oh
win.
yeah.
Or yeah, or like, oh hey, that guy looks pretty, I like that guy, he looks handsome, I'm going to pick him to win. Or the Swifties are probably going to want the Chiefs to win, so Taylor Swift fans are going to be tuning in, and they're going to be like, hey, let's go Chiefs. So it is what it is. But when
Yeah.
it comes to the X's and O's, after the game's over and the all 22 drops, and then we take a look at see what happens, that's where we step in as like NFL analysts or NFL fans that like really like the X's and O's of the game, and all that other stuff can like it's part of it, of course, but it's all for fun.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, thank you guys for tuning in so much to the Redbird Reboot podcast. We'll be off next week after the Super Bowl is done, barring any form of breaking news. We also know at least that NFL free agency is going to be starting up soon, which I believe the first date for that in 2024 is going to be
Is it
I believe March
March?
13th. Yeah, so you have the
Yeah, there we
NFL
go.
Combine first. We can go over some of the Combine areas, at least obviously, talk a little bit about that, but we'll be off at least for next week. We'll be having a little bit more of some draft coverage coming up with some more people who are going to be maybe some more experts or have been studying this part, which will be fun for some guests. We'll also be able to kind of have some other off-season content we'll be able to get to go through, some other mock drafts and other little contests at least as well. I'll give you more details about that coming up. But for now, this has been the Redbird Reboot podcast. I'm Blake Murphy for Marcos Labrada and for the Redbird Reboot podcast. Make sure you're following on YouTube. You can like and subscribe, as well as on social. You can look at Redbird Reboot as well. Thanks for tuning in. It's time for us to log off. Good night, everyone, and go Cards.
Good night, everyone.